My oldest son, Ernesto James, called me the night of George Zimmerman's not guilty verdict, when George Zimmerman's not guilty verdict was read. He was upset, and with tears in his voice, he told me for the first time in his life, he truly felt invisible, that his life as a black Chicano man living in this country meant nothing. I told him that I wished I could tell him that he was wrong, but truthfully, I had no words of comfort to offer. I could only encourage him to become a bigger part of the solution. I pushed him to continue learning, reading, and studying, to recognize this murder and the verdict are about white privilege, not about white skin. That Zimmerman may have pulled the trigger ending Trayvon Martin's life, but he is simply a line of code in a program of oppression that has been attempting to right the lives of Africans, indigenous, and poor whites living in this country for the past 500 years. I told him we are, first and foremost, fighting a system of privilege. Of course, that doesn't mean that there aren't individual enforcers of white privilege. It means that when we target individuals and call for their heads only, and then feel justice has been served, we are missing, as surely as the bloodthirsty click-clacking of Madame Defarge, the most important point of all. Our struggle is a struggle to free humanity from systems of dehumanizing oppression like capitalism, systems profiting from our bodies and later reducing us to distorted caricatures, signifying the fears and lies conjured to justify social control and our inevitable disposal. These divisions have created and have been given meaning in our social and racial lexicon to codify the rationalizations allowing the commodification of human beings. Capitalism has allowed us to create, maintain, and accept unquestioningly these constructed differentiations in the value of life. This construction of racial differences has created the unimaginable wealth of those who perpetrated this lie and establishes an artificial ordering of the world requiring no explanation beyond the metaphysical description of attributes and qualities possessed by the superior and inferior races. The suggestion that because Zimmerman's mother is from Peru eliminates so-called racial bias on his part is obtuse, partially because the very idea there is a white, black, brown, or yellow race is preposterous. It is pure science fiction, literally. Yet we have repeated this debunked pseudoscience of eugenics in almost every exchange we have. And let me be straight, I'm not trying to preach that I don't see color bullshit. That really is one of the most conflicted racists that really only the most conflicted of races try to sling. No, I am saying that we are all human beings, that on some level we share common goals of life, happiness, or the right to exist, and we are recognized as a species, those very basic desires exist across the spectrum of humanity. To my own sons and daughters, I have always said that they must rise above the expectations of our society, that they must embrace and plant in their hearts the truth that they are no one's flunky or stereotype, that they are in fact change in bodies and flesh, and have a responsibility to humanity and their chosen community to rise above the base, banal ideas others have about them. Not to prove something to those who accuse based on their own fears and inadequacies, but as an example of what we can be as human beings when we freely pursue our own destinies, passions, and paths in life. I am not ashamed to say I cried that night on the phone with Ernesto. I'm not ashamed to say when I heard how this man Zimmerman got his skull cracked by young Trayvon Martin, that my heart did not swell with pride at this young boy's bravery, fighting for his life against an unknown armed assailant. Tragically, like the rest of us who struggle against this system of brutality, neither young Trayvon nor most of you who will read this or hear it are the ones with the guns or the authority to use them. Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin in cold blood. However, the law and the state of Florida say he acted legally. Let that be a lesson to you, I told my son. Law does not equal justice. Law equals control. The law serves and protects the power of the state, the power of privilege. Nothing shocking about that. In this quote from Walter Benjamin's critique of violence, Benjamin was a German Jew who died flying the Nazis. Benjamin wrote, "Then it must be readily supposed that where the highest violence, that over life and death, occurs in the legal system, the origins of law jut manifestly and fearsomely into existence. For in the exercise of violence over life and death, more than any other act, the law affirms itself. It doesn't matter if Zimmerman acted legally and as a result is innocent, because innocence is a straw man. It confuses the issue. Once we dismiss this informal fallacy, the law protects all equally. It becomes evident the discussion we are having with our sons and daughters about society is deeply flawed and murderously inadequate. To imagine a legal entity whose entire existence is founded on genocide, the enslavement of millions of Africans, and the land theft of indigenous people would or could even create a fair and balanced system of law is naive at best, delusional at worst. The violence of the state serves as a clear and legitimate purpose, according to Benjamin, who wrote, "Once one might perhaps consider the surprising possibility that the law's interest in a monopoly of violence vis-a-vis individuals is explained not by the intention of preserving legal means, but rather by the intention of preserving the law itself. That violence, when not in the hands of the law, threatens it, not by the ends that it may pursue, but by its mere existence outside of the law." A young black child is murdered with premeditation in daylight, minutes from his father's house, and the questions we as a society come up with revolve around legalities? If the above statement by Benjamin is true, then what is the only possible conclusion we can come to about the death of young Trayvon Martin? This is the same murder we have seen countless pictures of, black and Mexican men and women lynched, hanging from trees and bridges. We try to pretend those extrajudicial actions, that they are extrajudicial actions, but the hard truth is that those lynchings upheld the power of the state's right to exist. The hard truth is law was served. I say this because if the perpetrators of those murders were guilty of usurping the right of the state to decide between life and death, they would have themselves felt the violence of the law. If in our society if the law in our society is the final determination of the use of violence, the violence of death, the violence of separation from family, the violence of isolation, then it must be used above reproach. If the state reserves for itself the right to implement these types of violence, then the state must be open to our critique as citizen subjects and unfortunately members of the group who find themselves most often on the receiving end of that violence. If we refuse to even consider limiting the violence of the law, the attempts of the state to preserve itself at all costs, even at the cost of our liberties, then we are getting what we have asked for, and our sons and daughters will answer for our cowardice with their blood. We are not the state. We are non-white, colonized, other subjects of the state. We do not wield the power of the state. The power of the state is wielded upon us. The state exists to serve the whims of the elite and their flunkies, their murderous flunkies. The power of the state was not designed to protect the disenfranchised or those who openly oppose its corrupt power. The reality is those of us on the receiving end of that brutality are unorganized to resist it, uneducated in understanding the system of oppression that controls and manipulates our daily lives. How we choose to respond to the double lynching of Trayvon Martin and the countless of others, daily state-sanctioned executions will mark our generation for years to come. Before I hung up, I told my son that I loved him, to stay close to his family and his children, to make sure that his children understood how much he loves them and how important they are to our future. I thought about all the people flooding into the street as we spoke, hoodies up for young Trayvon Martin. And I kept hearing in my head the lyrics to the Guns of Brixton by The Clash. You can cut us, you can bruise us, but you'll have to answer too. And it made my heart race again.